Welcome to Off the Shelf. It's a new series about books. And who better to do it than two book lovers? I'm Kate Johnson, and this is my co-host, Betsy Nelson. So Betsy, let's get the story rolling.
Sure.
What's your favorite book?
Well, that could be a very long conversation, let's be honest.
You know, I had trouble trying to come up with some because I had so many.
I know. I had to flick through. I have the Goodreads app where you can track what you've read. And I had to go through it and try to narrow down my list, and then I had to write it down, and it took too long. But my first one, I'm going to go with the classic. I like Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.
I think we have that actually right
we do.
Here.
That is
in case you're not familiar with it.
Yeah, that is a well-thumbed copy because I've read it several times. It's just your classic.
But what do you like about it?
I like the difference in the time period. You kind of can go in, and it's the way she writes her language. I mean, it'll fall in later when we talk about our favorite opening lines, but I think it's got a great opening. And
read it. What is it?
Want to read it now? Okay.
Yeah.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
There you go. That
So it's
sums it up.
You got money, you want a wife. Not really, but apparently that's what they wanted. But I mean, it's just the difference in the class structure, and they don't write books like the classics anymore.
No, and it stood the test of time. What is it, 150 years old at least?
Think so. And I mean, there are places that have Jane Austen weekends where people go in costume, and they have a afternoon walk, and they all walk together with their umbrellas in costume, and they have speakers, and I mean, people just really...
How about Jane Austen, and is it zombies?
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies,
Yeah,
yes.
that's right.
I haven't read that one, but it is the spinoff, yeah.
I actually saw the movie.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, and it was great if
Yeah.
you're a zombie fan.
And I'm not a zombie fan.
Well, I had never read Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, yeah?
Prejudice, so it was all new to me.
Well, you can take the book home with you if you want to read
That's
it.
true. I can expand
You
my
can.
reading.
But, and I mean, it's just given us so many, people have expanded on it so much. I mean, you have movies where people go back in time, or people go to these Jane Austen themed weekends, or I've read a modern retelling of it too. I don't remember the name of the book offhand, but it was all the same people had the same name, but they were both in a rock band.
Was it weird?
Yeah.
Especially if
Yes.
one of the things you like about it is a time period,
Yes.
to make it modern would then throw it all off.
Yeah, it does. But then my next one is this one here, and this is called Dear Fahrenheit 451, Love and Heartbreak in the Stacks, and it's by Annie Spence, and she's a librarian in Detroit, and it's basically love letters and breakup letters that she has written to different books in the library.
So it's books she likes and books she doesn't like?
Books she likes
that...
and books she hates.
Oh, books she hates.
Yes, and it'll be there's one where it's I don't remember the title, but it's, you've been on our shelf since the 60s and nobody's checked you out since then, so we're getting rid of you.
Hit the road. Or
Yeah.
So what books did she love?
Well, she loved Fahrenheit 451. Obviously, it's the title of the book. She really liked The Diary of Anne Frank, and I think that the letter in there from that one is very touching.
Okay.
And then she really didn't like 50 Shades of Grey, or
Well, I get that.
where they wrote it from his point of view, which is the same book, just you flip.
Yep.
I think it's called Grey, but I'm not positive
Yeah, I
on that.
think so.
She didn't like that one
Or
either.
Christian?
Yeah.
It's one of those.
And then the next one I really like is called The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman. And the main character's name is Irene, and she is a librarian who works for this kind of organization called the Library, which is it's a fantasy novel, so it's in between dimensions. So she goes back and forth through these parallel universes collecting books to keep the world safe, and her sidekick is a dragon.
Oh,
so it's a
okay.
whole, and it's
Is
a
it
series.
a series, or is
yes.
it?
Yep, there are 3 or 4 books, 4 books I believe right now, and I got them through the library, so they're all really good, and they read quick.
Do you have to read them in order?
Yes. Yep, because they do
Build on each one?
Mm-hmm. And to kind of understand the characters from the other one, you kind of need to...
Because sometimes they'll
Yeah.
do a series where they'll be standalone, but they need to be
Yeah,
they
these
can be
ones,
read.
these ones, the action from the previous ones
Builds.
impact. Yep. So, but they're real quick reads, and it's really interesting. So, yeah, I liked that one too.
Okay.
My other one is a nonfiction, and it's called Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy: 4 Women Undercover in the Civil War by Karen Abbott. And so the story focuses on 4 women during the Civil War era, 2 who were involved on the Confederate side and 2 on the Union side, and they were all spies.
Okay. And so were they Confederate spying for the Union or Union?
Both. Yep.
Back and forth
And
and-
one of the ladies was actually dressed as a man and fought.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
she was in battle, and then you have an abolitionist who's helping to sneak slaves around, and also a widow that had would hide soldiers in her house and then sneak them out in Confederate uniforms
Oh,
to
wow.
escape.
Okay.
But
Were
yeah,
they actual Confederate soldiers or Union soldiers?
they were Union soldiers dressed up as Confederates to sneak
okay.
out. So, and she had her in-law, her sister-in-law and her brother were living with her, and they both fought for the Confederacy. And also her maid went and worked for Jefferson Davis and would spy on them and then report back to her.
Okay.
And then she would forward the information. So it was just really interesting because you don't hear a lot about what women did during the Civil War.
That's true.
So it was a really interesting.
Other than Claire Barton and
Yes.
the nursing.
Yeah, so I mean, it was really interesting to hear that and to hear, 4 other women's stories that didn't know anything about, and I just heard about it on a podcast I was listening to called "What Should I Read Next," and they recommended it to one of the people that was on that show. So yeah, so those are my favorites. And what about you, Miss Kay?
My favorites. Well, I'll tell you that, as I said earlier, it was a tough call because there's so many, but my all-time favorite is called the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society. And I know that's a handful of a title, but it is a great, great book. And you read it, didn't you?
I did finally. Yes, I
And
did
it's-
finally read it.
My friend Rachel Stearns recommended it whenever it came out several years ago. And one day, I downloaded it on my Kindle and started reading it. And I literally read it probably once a year ever since then because it's just such a wonderful book. But there's several things about it I really like. And one is I like the time period like you do with Jane Austen. And I like the writing because it's set up as letters.
Yeah.
And the characters write back and forth. And so I love the lead on this book. It's called Dear Sydney, and it's the author, the main protagonist is a writer, and she's on tour. And so she's writing to her publisher, Sydney, and she writes, Susan Scott is a wonder. We sold over 40 copies of my book, which is very pleasant. But much more thrilling from my standpoint was the food. Susan managed to procure ration coupons for icing sugar and real eggs for meringue. If all her literary luncheons are going to achieve these heights, I won't mind touring about the country. Do you suppose that a lavish bonus could spur her on to butter? Let's try it. You may deduct the money from my royalties. Well, just from that little bit, you can probably figure out it's something to do with the war because of the rationing. Well, it takes place in England right after World War II. And the writer, wrote a column during World War II to keep people's spirits up. And then they combined all the columns into a book, and now she's touring the country. And it's a wonderful book because as most people know, one of the big things in World War II was the Holocaust. And the book leads you very gently into some very difficult topics. And I just think the way they do it, and as a writer, I admire the work that was done in here. This is a wonderful book. And the best part is there's a movie, and it's going to be on Netflix in August. So if you're a fan, watch for it. Another book that I really, really like, and this is sort of my go-to when I need to calm and relax, but it's called The Book of Still Meadow by a woman named Gladys Tabor. And Gladys Tabor wrote nearly 60 books spanning 5 decades.
Oh, wow.
And Still Meadow is her home in rural Connecticut, and it was a house built in 1690. And the thing that's so great is she was married and had a couple kids, and she had a friend who had a couple kids. And they decided they wanted a house in the country. And they also raised Cocker Spaniels on the side. So these two women would load up their car and take their dogs to dog shows. And this is true. And they would then look for a house. And they found this house, the 1690 house, literally kind of falling apart. And the thing was, is there had been a suicide in the house. And so they were able to buy it
Oh, yeah.
that fit their budget. And so I love the beginning of this book. As I look back over the early days at the farm, I sometimes wonder why we were never discouraged. Addicts of country living can easily understand. Once you put down roots in your own place, you have a special awareness of how blessed you are. The feeling is compounded of many things, such as walking on dewy grass instead of pavements, and watching a harvest moon rise over your very own swamp, and bringing in your own fresh asparagus from the bed down by the pond, and hearing the stillness of an early morning, and breathing snow-pure air on a January day, and putting a log of wood from the fallen apple tree in the old orchard on the open fire. And she wrote a column for many, many years, I think for Woman's Day magazine. But I just think her writing is just so eloquent. But it's just normal stuff. It's entertaining guests and feeding their Cocker Spaniels. It's life. So it's a good piece. Another one I really like is Mickey Spillane was a crime writer. And he wrote a lot of mysteries, and he was of the old school where the women were dames and that kind of thing. And so I like this opening on One Lonely Night. Nobody ever walked across a bridge, not on a night like this. The rain was misty enough to be almost fog-like, a cold gray curtain that separated me from the pale ovals of white that were faces locked behind the steamed-up windows of the cars that hissed by. Even the brilliance that was Manhattan by night was reduced to a few sleepy yellow lights off in the distance. You know, I just love opening paragraphs because they set the stage for the books. And if it's a bad opening paragraph, chances are I'm not going to read it. Another one I really like, now I don't like this book, but I love this opening paragraph. And it has to do with The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson.
You don't like that book?
No, I don't like that movie.
Well, no, the movies are crazy.
Yeah,
both
the
the
movie's
original
really
and the
creepy.
remake. But the book was good.
Well, it's not as creepy as the movie.
No.
But no living organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Ooh, that's so creepy.
It is, yeah.
Because you know there's something really icky in that
Something
house.
bad in that house.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it doesn't mean anything good.
So what are you reading now?
What am I reading now? Well, I have quite a few books going at once because I have the books on my phone that I can read while my son is falling asleep. Or Alex is falling asleep. And then I have the actual books that I can read. And when I order stuff from the library, they all show up at once. So, and I just kind of move around with whatever I'm feeling like. So some of my recent reads, I just finished listening to an audiobook called The Tao of Bill Murray, Real Life Stories of Joy, Enlightenment, and Party Crashing by Gavin McEdwards. So it sort of looks into Bill Murray, the actor's life, and his career and what he does. Like
he does crash things.
He'll crash bachelor parties, or he'll go up and put money in somebody's pocket and be like, nobody's ever going to believe you that I did this. There's no proof or something. And so it was really interesting to hear that and to kind of hear, like, I didn't realize he doesn't have like a staff. He has no publicist. He has no agent. He only has a lawyer, and he has a 1-800 number that you call and leave a message for him.
Oh, there you go. That
and
works.
then you have to hope that he checks the
message. Apparently he does not always.
No, he doesn't. And then, or he'll just be like, he'll just show up like right before the show starts to start filming, or he'll just take off and they'll be like, we can't find Bill, and he'll be like, well, the place down the street has the best cheeseburgers, so I went to get a cheeseburger. And they are pretty good.
There you
So
go.
it was really interesting though to read about him and to kind of hear more about what like each of his there's a part where they go through every movie he's done, and so it was interesting to hear kind of how he was on the set, or if it was a good movie
Is
or
it
bad.
nonfiction?
And yes, it's a nonfiction book, and the audio book is read by the author. And it took me a little bit to get into it because he doesn't really have a voice for audiobooks.
Oh.
It's kind of gravelly and deep, and for a second I thought that there was something wrong with the audiobook. I actually crashed my app and went back into it, and I was like, no, this is actually his voice. Okay.
So once you accepted it, then did it kind of grow on you?
Yep, it kind of grew on me. So I really liked that. And then I also just finished a book called Dear Mr. Knightley by Catherine, I believe the last name is Ray. It's Reay.
Okay.
And it follows, the main character's name is Samantha, and she gets a grant to go to grad school. But because she turned it down at first, once she reapplies for it and gets it, the head of the foundation says, well, you can have the grant, but in order to keep it, you have to write me letters and let me know how everything is going and keep me apprised of everything that's happening. And they give her a pseudonym, Mr. Knightley, and so she's supposed to send letters, and he's not going to write back at all. But it's just,
Okay.
and they sort of become journal entries. So you kind of go through with, she was in the foster care system, and so she was living at this house for, I think it's run through a church or something.
Okay.
And then, so she makes friends with a boy that's there going through the system, and it's so how they get along, and and then she meets a famous writer and other people, and so it's just kind of how she's able to use the letters as more of a journal, and to sort of, and she's always hidden behind literary authors, for quotes and stuff. Instead of saying something herself, she'll quote Elizabeth Bennet or somebody, and people are like, that's not you. That's a classic author. And so she finally finds her own voice.
Okay.
And so it was just really good, and it was a real quick read, and sometimes it's nice to just read a book that's kind of light and you don't have to sit and think about it.
I can agree with that because I've read two great summer reads.
Yeah.
And I have to share these because they're both on the New York Times bestseller list. One is The Perfect Couple by Ellen Hildebrand.
Okay.
And she's a chick lit writer, so I don't know how many men would be interested, but I know women like Ellen Hildebrand. And this one is great because it's a wedding. All her books take place on Nantucket. And so although I've never been there, I feel like I've been. And so this wealthy boy is marrying a poor girl.
Ah.
Okay. And so it's wedding weekend in Nantucket, and the family has a big house, and all these people start coming. And then, of course, a dead body floats up in the bay. And now that puts a crimp in everything.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you find out
I can see that.
all these perfect couples aren't so perfect. And it's actually really good. In fact, I could not put it down. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm trying to read as I'm falling asleep. And then I gave it to a friend, and she couldn't put it down. And then her friend couldn't put it down. So it's one of the very best of Ellen Hildebrand's ever done, I think.
Okay.
And then the other one is by invitation only. And this is by Dorothea Benton Frank. Dorothea Benton Frank. I never get that quite straight. But she writes about South Carolina and the low country on the islands by Charleston. And anyway, this one is sort of the reverse. It's a rich girl marrying a poor boy. And what makes it fun is each chapter is written by his mother or her mother or some other character. And so it opens with the groom's family who run a farmer's market in Charleston, down the low country, and they're preparing for this party. And these rich people are going to be flying in. And it is so funny because these people, the first thing, the rich wife discovers moonshine and then takes a shine to the uncle. And it just gets complicated from there. And this is another laugh out loud funny. but it's a great book, and it's probably one of her very best. She writes one every year, and so it's really one of the best she's done, and it just made me laugh out loud, and again, I could barely put it down.
Yeah, that reminds me, the other book that I just recently finished, it's called As You Wish, Inconceivable Tales for the Making of the Princess Bride by Carrie Elwes, who played Wesley. And it was really funny to me because it follows the whole process of making the movie. And this is like, The Princess Bride is one of my all-time favorite movies. Like, I could watch it a billion times back to back. And the book is really great too, because the book reads as nonfiction, and it actually takes you like part way to get through the book before you realize there is no real country by this name. This isn't real. Like, he's talking about going to this museum and seeing all this stuff from the story, and I'm like, this doesn't exist. Why did it take me this long to figure it out? And like, the opening line is, this is my favorite book in all the world, though I have never read it.
That's a great lead.
It is, because it starts out with the guy that's writing it. It's supposed to be a story that his father was always told growing up, and then he would tell it to him, and then it was actually a really, really, really long story in the original version that talked all about politics and all this stuff, and so he's apparently shortened it down to just the action part for it. But so they read it as nonfiction. But so this is talking about trying to make the movie, and so you're hearing from Carrie about everything from when he came in through the end of it, but then there's also paragraphs involved where it's other people that were in the movie voicing about things as well. So like, you'll have a paragraph from Robin Wright, or the director Rob Reiner. All the people, everybody that's still alive, because Andre the Giant passed away. But even him, like, when they talk about his life growing up, like, they had the big read-through in this hotel, and then he went to the hotel bar and had so much to drink that he passed out in the hotel entryway in the middle of the floor, and none of the staff could move him.
Because
he was so big. So he slept in the middle of the hotel room through the night, and then woke up in the morning and sat up and just walked out the door like nothing had happened. But so it's just hearing the different stories, and you know, they had these professional stunt guys come in who were sword men to teach them about this it's because it's called the greatest sword fight in the history of sword fights or something. And so they were basically working on this from before the shoot started all the way up until they filmed it.
Oh, wow.
So like, if they weren't filming the movie, they were running their fight scene. Because it had to be the best fight scene ever. And they had to learn, you know, to fight with right and left hand, because they switch halfway through the fight. So, but it was really just interesting. And I remember hearing people talk about when the movie came out. A friend of ours went to it, and he said that you could hear people flipping through the book trying to see if everything matched up. And it was just really good, because it's fun when you like theater and you like movies to hear how everything goes, because you hope that the actors are having as great a time as you have watching it, because it'd hate to find out like, oh, we all hated each other and we couldn't get along, and it kind of changes everything when they don't. So it was really fun to hear that they had such a great time. And
so what you saw on the screen was really
real,
of the experience.
and that they all still kind of loved that they did it.
Well, on that note, Betsy, this is the end of our first episode. Off the Shelf.